Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca from Mexico City with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, all the way from Oakland, California. We're online at Whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find my personal social media handle as @Eduardo. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notification, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. We have merch as well. If you fancy a shirt, contact us through our site at Whatsleftpodcast.com. Andy will always answer you there. Thank you, Andy, for doing that. Credits and kudos to Andy forever. Thank you. All right. So welcome back, Michael Hoffman. Michael Hoffman is a socialist and community college maths professor and former ISO comrade of Andrew Lipson. And we've had you on an episode before. So thank you for being here with us once again. And Andy, why don't you take it away with what we're doing today and why is Michael here with us?
Well, actually, Michael had sent me and you, I think it was an email about like an idea he had about an episode around science, which I do want to do. And then I was like, wait a second, slow your roll, Michael. We still need to talk about Hamas and resistance, which is something I'd talked about kind of offline about saying, hey, that would be a great episode. And then I kind of was like, let's do that first. And then all this stuff stepped off in Yemen, in Gaza, I would say in Ukraine and Russia and the United States. And so really the center, and then of course on campuses with what's been happening with protests and people being deported. I think all these things are connected. And so I thought, I asked Michael to say, let's talk about some of these things, and then let's get to those other items, Hamas resistance, other things as well. But I kind of want to just go through and see what do we see happening here, and do something that I don't think a lot of people are doing, which is connecting these things, which I do think they have to be connected to be understood. So that's what I'm hoping Michael can join us for this conversation, particularly because his political beat, is much more actually what's been going on in Palestine and Gaza, because that's what he's kind of connected to on campus. So I want to hear what he's thinking, what people are saying about it, and how they're responding, because I'm not on a campus, at least not on a college campus. So, I think Michael's point of view is going to be invaluable, regardless of whether you're in community college, Michael. But I think that's an extra little asterisk next to your name.
All right. Hope I can be invaluable.
So let's see. So let me just say some of the things that I think have happened that have been meaningful. I'm going to gloss over them because, I can't go into it in detail. But last week, I think it was last week. How many days was it? 3 or 4 days ago? Almost last week. U.S. decided to bomb Yemen. And can you tell me again, Michael, how do you pronounce? I don't want to say Houthis anymore.
Ansar Allah.
I'm going to write it down. Ansar Allah. So they were attacking Ansar Allah in Yemen, and a major attack. Tomahawk missiles fired from ships, planes flying off. Trump, the very bellicose language of like, how dare you try to blockade the Red Sea? We're blasting you. I'll just say that that Ansar Allah had threatened to reblock the Red Sea, but it was in relationship to the fact that Israel was had restarted its blockade of Palestine and of Gaza. So theirs was in response to what Israel was already starting to do, and they hadn't even really started yet to restart their firing on ships and things like that. So whatever U.S. said it was doing, the reason it was saying, I didn't really buy it. And then, of course, a few days later, the so-called ceasefire, which was never a ceasefire. Many Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, not just in the West Bank. I mean, not many Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since the so-called ceasefire, but many have been killed in Gaza as well since the ceasefire. And now it was officially over. Israel was reattacking. And a lot of people were like, there are people who have had hopes in Trump of him being a peace candidate and be like, what's he doing? He must be in the pocket of the Israeli lobby. And, and I don't believe that's accurate. This is what I partly want to talk about today. And I think it's very connected to the so-called peace overtures that U.S. is trying to make with Russia in the quote ceasefire in Ukraine, as it tries to offload and escalate a war there, as it again trying to get Europe to spend vast more money on its defense budget, as well as the retooling of the European economy towards being on more of a war economy. Like you're talking about companies like Volkswagen now saying some of our manufacturing is going to go towards munitions now, not as much towards cars. That's the kind of changes that happened in the U.S. economy prior and during World War II. And so Europe is going on a war footing. So U.S. has gotten Europe to go and escalate, or at least prepare itself for a larger war, at the same time as saying it's trying to make ceasefire or whatever in Ukraine. But really what it's trying to do is now pull itself out of there so it can do exactly what it's doing in the Middle East, because that is a staging ground and part of the staging ground for challenging China. And Iran is not just an ally of Russia. It's actually, China has developed contracts and agreements with Iran that are commensurate with the types of relationships the U.S. has had longstanding with Israel, where they have, port access, China using Iran as sort of a test lab for its own, all of its surveillance stuff and technology, as well as in relationships with the special, like the CIA of Iran. So that's the kind of relationship China has developed with them. And so the U.S., I think what this ultimately is U.S. preparing to take on and making more serious efforts to isolate and then challenge Iran in the coming months and years. So you are not seeing Trump act as a peacemaker. He is expanding the war. All he's doing is maybe changing the tactics and trying to extract the U.S. from having its hand in 2 or 3 pies and just have it in 2 pies, so that it can really focus on expanding the war in the Middle East and into Asia, while they get Europe and Ukraine to carry on a war with Russia. And just to say this, like I was telling Michael, like the title, the operating episode of this title is, we have to cease seeing ceasefires as any sort of peace. They are not. They are a time to reload, and that is what has happened here. Ceasefires are just war making halted so that people can be in a better position to fight more aggressively later. So that's a summary of what I see happening. I just want to talk about it.
I mean, I think I had a conversation with my friend Jake, who I've had episodes on What's Left before, so I think I would respond to what's out there, maybe, because I'm not versed in the politics of our foreign affairs, of what's happening and what the predictions might look like for a World War III. And luckily, thank you, Andy, for being more of that, being more in tuned and taking on the temperature of what's happening outside of the USA or North America, because I'm in Mexico, and telling us what you think your predictions are according from what you're analyzing from the various sources that you're looking at. And I speak with my closest friend, Jake, that I grew up with, and he is a MAGA supporter. He is a Trump supporter. He loves everything that's happening. And he was also very much against the censorship that happened in 2020. We were both former Bernie supporters. And he is anti the Democrats, and I thought at one point he was anti-government, or at least this government. But he does see Trump, and I think some of our audience who do listen to us, who had we found many ways of crossing ideologies, folk that follow RFK Jr. or folk that have were pro freedom of speech have listened to us. However, when we discuss Trump and what they have thought of as Trump being their savior and the peace president, that's what people thought that this president would do, and that's what Jake's told me that's happening. I think that you've said it just as we've analyzed, Andy. A ceasefire is a period of time to just recuperate, to reload, to figure out what's next, what's another strategic plan, and on this as we beat the wars of drum in this country, and it's false to think, that this is a president that's going to deliver us into a non-World War III. That's what Jake and a lot of my folk think. And as was said when there was, I guess, the reprisal or the reprimand towards Zelensky when he was in the White House and saying, "You're trying to get us in World War III," but it's not going to stop. We are going to continue on this path, and everything that's happening now is showing that. And if he is listening, some of my friends that are listening on to this episode, I hope that they see that and that they oppose the next phase of this, the war that's happening in our lives, which I used to think I didn't pay much attention to until we've begun having more conversations about it on What's Left. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate we've split with a lot of our former groups, other working class folk who do think that this is the path that we should be on and that Trump will deliver us to a peaceful world.
Yeah, I have in my milieu a different set of ideas about what's happening that are kind of similarly that I also disagree with. So, like, to just touch on the ceasefire, it was pretty well predicted that Netanyahu did not want to actually go into stage 2, and it also was very clear that the U.S. is desperate to maintain dollar supremacy because of its huge. That's a huge lever of power. So the U.S. is trying to prevent a bloc from forming. Right? They're trying to make divisions within the BRICS countries, and when it comes to Israel, one of the dynamics really is one related to real estate. I do think that we get a little more honesty about what the U.S. empire is about from Donald Trump. I do. I think there's much less mincing words, and one of the things that supports this idea that really they want the land, they want Gaza, they would rather the Palestinians be gone. They want to pave it and make it their new luxury economic hotspot, and the Palestinians are in the way. So this brings me to like the model that we have of what is the U.S. government. It is, and what does it mean to talk about the U.S. empire? The U.S. empire is something that, first of all, many wealthy people have invested in, right? So like every single bomb shipment, every single shipment of tanks or planes, that's someone projecting profits years out. So it's not like these arms deals are just really a response to immediately what's happening in the world. People have thought through an investment strategy that involves using these weapons. So that's not the only thing, but that is very clear. It's very clear to me that part of what's happening is they have to get a return on investment on these weapons. But that's just the hard power. The U.S. empire is also, I don't know people will tell me this is the wrong word, but I think it's kind of like, a cartel or like a gangster group that has a sort of collective set of tools that they use to ensure longer term profitability. And they even use the word U.S. hegemony, right? They are convinced, and this is where there's a picture of show it. Actually, we should show it, of all of the past presidents all together with Donald Trump and their wives. They're all saluting the flag. Actually, it's like this, whatever, they're all saluting the flag, saying the Pledge of Allegiance. They're all both like materially and therefore also ideologically tied to the profit generating violent domination of the rest of the world by the US. So I feel like if you're confused about that, then things will be surprising and not make sense. Now, I don't think that or rather, I'll say I don't know how much the US was directly involved with Israel's decision to re-engage in Gaza, but it does look like it has a lot to do with maintaining Netanyahu's power within Israel. That politically, if you look at the political forces on Netanyahu, basically when they declared a ceasefire, they had to go back to court. He had to go back to court on corruption charges, and he cried. He cried, "You people are making my life miserable." And it's satisfying to see that evil person cry. But it definitely is. So whatever Israel does in terms of expanding its territorial reach, in terms of destruction in the neighboring countries, aligns with U.S. interests precisely because it prevents that region from being united outside of U.S. domination. So, and this is also a historical pattern, right? It's like they funded, back when it was secular nationalism that was inspiring and uniting Arab people all over the world. They did everything they could to destroy that, and part of their solution to that was to fund Islamism. And we should talk about that. Should be in our Hamas episode, but the point is that the empire of the United States has a huge interest in dividing and even just causing destruction. For Israel, the colony of Israel, they've always relied on changing the facts on the ground. So like what happened, they destroyed Gaza, and now everybody's talking about how to rebuild Gaza. And so that changes the dynamics. Syria fell, and now they actually have more territory in Syria, and so this is sort of feeding a conflagration with Iran, who's the sort of most powerful player in that region. And so now it looks like, because of the movement of U.S. warships, Iran is coming to defend Yemen, Yemen's blockade. It looks like they're getting what they want, in the sense of, like, the U.S. empire is getting what it wants in terms of escalation. So yeah, people who thought that the ceasefire was a big win for the resistance, like it proved the, I didn't think that, because I'm like, as far as I can tell, Israel still holds the power. Like, Netanyahu's not out of power, and I guess one of the things I want to add is how freaking clever I think Trump is, actually. That there's so I guess that Trump has made it look like there's been a big shift. He also delivered on campaign promises. I mean, he's mass deporting people like he said he would. He's escalating all kinds of internal repression. And he made it, I do think that it was basically a show where because he wants basically the fallout for the war with Russia going south to be on Ukraine and Europe because they want a division of labor. They want, like you were saying, they want Europe to basically focus on that region of the world because they need to focus on Iran, which is part of the broader project of isolating China. So that's my take. And I could go into any one of those claims in more detail, but I'll just leave it there.
Well, I guess I would say that I'm not sure that I would say Trump has delivered on those things. One area he did deliver on is the January 6th protesters being pardoned.
Yeah.
And in fact, Glenn Greenwald has said he hasn't deported as many people in February as Biden did last year.
Yeah.
But he's doing high profile stuff. I get
Right.
that, and they're now threatening Palestinian activists and actually deporting Palestinian activists.
Yeah.
So no question, he's not a pro-immigrant. I mean, he's anti-immigrant, just like Biden was, but he's actually not coming through in the way that he said he would on that. And he's definitely not coming through in what I think people thought the spirit of him in terms of making World War III less likely, de-escalating global war. He said it, and like Eduardo said, "Oh, I'm gonna lecture Zelensky about you're not going to deliver us to World War III," which is a fucking joke because Zelensky is a puppet. Like it's inaccurate to say that Benjamin Netanyahu will bring us into World War III.
Right.
If that's inaccurate, you can definitely not say Zelensky can bring the United States into World War III. I mean, the United States is going to have World War III because it needs World War III to make sure that China and Russia do not get their goals of making what they call a multipolar world, which basically means taking the United States down a peg or two so that the United States now has to share. The UN and there are some people who think that the United States is now positioning itself to share. Like, okay, we'll take Greenland, we'll take Panama, but you get that and you get that. That is definitely not what's happening. Like, they are clearly escalating. They have clearly gotten Europe to escalate and get its population, apparently, possibly, to accept a massive escalation of its war-making ability. And in listening to a guy, Alex Craner, who is from Europe, and I didn't agree with everything he had to say, but one of the interesting things he said about Europe, in addition to the fact that industries are now being no longer for just commercial use, but for war-making use. He was also noting that the fact that Europe has been deindustrialized by this war and by having to take sides with the United States now puts it in a position to force its own working class to accept the fact that if you're going to reindustrialize, you're going to reindustrialize with tanks, not with cars, and with 155 shell mortars or whatever attack things, not toothpaste. So that is something that Europe is on the path now to do, and they've gotten. And I think that they're going to get a working class that's desperate for jobs to accept that the jobs are going to come on with these terms. And so now the U.S. is pivoting, and I actually think partly what it's doing here is it is working in concert with Israel. These things did not happen by. It wasn't like, oh, I see what the Netanyahu didn't say. Oh, I see what the United States is doing. This gives me a good place to stop the formal ceasefire. No, this looks like a definite turn towards the U.S. committing to more violence in the Middle East and ultimately in the Pacific, because that's where it's trying to go. And I actually think it's trying to set facts on the ground so that it basically has no choice. It has to leave, and Europe's going to have to deal with the fire that the U.S. has no intention of bringing that fire down. They're going to talk about ceasefire. Trump's going to talk about peace. They know that's not going to happen. Well, I think they know that's going to happen. The people who don't know it's not going to happen are all the people opposed to the Ukraine war, and then people who think that Trump is trying to bring peace. So that's just something I would say is like, is like this. This looks like a definite strat. It looks like to me the U.S. is forcing everyone in the world to understand that it's turning its attention elsewhere, and I do believe this is largely about Iran. And I agree with you, Michael, that ultimately, in order for Israel to be the powerhouse that it's going to need, the U.S. as a proxy of the United States, for it to be that powerhouse, it's going to have to clean house in West Bank and Gaza, and then project its that idea of Greater Israel is going to become some kind. Well, they're going to try to. U.S. is going to try to help make it a reality as it pushes. I mean, that's the U.S. pushing its imperial interests in that region using its aircraft carrier, right? The permanent aircraft carrier of Israel to do so. And that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think I like that way of framing it, where Israel's a permanent aircraft carrier, but also Europe now is going to be sort of an arm of it's going to build another branch of its industrial base focused on war. And
just to say that Europe is now becoming an armed proxy, a better armed proxy for the United States, because if that war goes nuclear, that's nuclear with Europe and Russia, and the U.S. can live with that.
Right, that's right. I want to say that when I was saying that Trump delivered on promises, this will connect, but when Trump delivered on promises, what I meant is that he was good at making it look like he was delivering on promises, right? So really the big thing to me was like it's very clear that his intervention is what began the ceasefire in Israel. So he can claim, right? So the people who were convinced he was going to bring peace, like they can point to that, right? But you also have to like have no idea about the history of U.S. imperial twists and turns, and that pausing to warm relations, to then to then regroup and rearm, but also pivot. Right, it's something that the U.S. has done many times. Like there was a period, there. I thought I learned recently about the Hillary Clinton reset button with Russia in 2009. Right, and it was like, why did she need a reset button? Well, because they had been going at Russia, and then they needed to ease tensions a little bit. But that was basically to then, essentially try to make them vulnerable for what came next, where then Russia became the main scapegoat, right? So like 7 years after that, anybody who didn't want to vote for Hillary Clinton was a Russian asset and should be locked up for treason, whatever, right? So like this like switching of like being number one bogeyman to being like, hey, no, we can work things out, like is actually an old thing. Being nicey nice with Russia and being hard on Ukraine will, soon give way to even more escalation and military investment and destabilization of that whole region, because that is what is actually required in order for the U.S. to maintain hegemony. They kind of good cop, bad cop us, and they just sort of take turns taking the blame, right? So like the cleverness of Trump, chewing out Zelensky, means that basically he's basically putting all the blame. It serves so many purposes at once. One, it makes it look like now their policy towards Russia might change, that they might soften. It looks like they are not somehow responsible for Ukraine just getting smashed. But they're still going to continue the exact same policy, because it's, again, it comes from the material need for them to be able to maintain dominance. And so it's like that argument about the agenda has a continuity. I feel like it's frustrating how hard that is to convince people of. And I felt that a lot lately, and especially right after Trump got reelected, I was very angry with people who were And in my circles, they were very afraid, like extra afraid, And I felt, and I was not kind sometimes. And I regret how I communicated certain disagreements, because I do think people have a right to be afraid. But we had a right to be terrified under Biden. I will say there's a good case for especially undocumented people, trans people, like in the near term right now, it is especially bad for them. It is. They're the main scapegoats. Like, why is Trump their guy? I think Trump is their guy because he's associated with that internal repression. He's kind of built a brand around it. And I do think that the U.S., meaning like he's ideologically associated with it, right? And some people like him for that, and some people hate him for that. So if you think immigrants are the problem, and you think we need to project strength in the world, then Trump's great. And if you think those things are terrible, then you're going to be afraid and manipulated into doing whatever the Democrats say. I mean, I think that's worn off some. I think that, but it's just this clear dynamic that as soon as there's an election, they get to trade who's to blame. And once one group of people who are supposed to be really, really afraid, and they work really hard to be like, they're coming for you. Our democracy is ending. Right? And if you actually have to believe there was any kind of democracy in order to fall into that. So I don't know. I don't know how to convince people. I think Brian Berletic does a good job of laying out through policy documents that no, actually they still are focused on global hegemony. They're talking about it in their policy documents, even in the main press conferences. They're all talking about how can we maintain global hegemony. Nobody in the U.S. government is talking about the future, the future multipolar world. And that's because they're so invested in the current arrangement, they're going to do whatever they can to keep it, which is why I also agree with how you've been laying it out, you guys, but on your podcast in general, like that kind of dynamic, like if we think the U.S. isn't actually going to ease up on its desire to conquer the world, then they would be willing to use nukes to maintain their hegemony. And it's hard to see an escalating dynamic. It's hard to see how there's going to be some kind of de-escalation unless there's some kind of significant revolutionary uprisings that basically actually remove them from power.
Mm-hmm. And let me say something, because I think people who support Trump do not support him because of his internal repression. They actually support him because, number one, they think he's protecting jobs for Americans, making America great again by protecting jobs for Americans. That's what they think his anti-immigrant stuff is for, which it isn't. It's an attack on one set of workers as a prelude to an internal attack. It's Patriot Act writ large, basically. Again, people don't see it that way. That's not how it's even talked about on some sections of the left. They'd say, well, we've got to do something about immigration. There's got to be some kind of pathway. That's why people who reject open borders, if you reject open borders, you are going to fall for the state every time. Because the only way to not empower the state is to say those borders have to be completely free. I'm not going to allow a single state rifle to protect it. And workers can walk freely through there. Any other position means you're going to get pictures like we saw with those so-called guys from gangs being sent back to El Salvador. I don't know if you saw any of those pictures, Michael, but it looked like Guantanamo Bay, and now the president of El Salvador, now he's a guy who's like, the gangs are a problem in here. I'm going to crack down on them. And he's popular for that. That's not what Trump is saying. Trump is saying, I'm going to protect American jobs and I'm going to protect freedom. I'm going to protect people. I'm going to allow people to say what they want to say. DEI says you got to keep your mouth shut. I'm against censorship. With him and Musk are saying that. And that's what's so absurd about that, because people are buying that piece too. And they're cracking down hard, as I talked to you about, on the Palestinian movement and calling it anti-Semitism. Yeah. And they're connecting their anti-free speech stuff saying you have no right to talk about Palestinian right to resist, or even the fact that Israel is an apartheid state, because then you must be a threat to Jews. You must be anti-Semitic. So you have no right to say that, and we're not going to let you say those kind of hate crimes. So no, we are not for free speech, and we're going to intersect their attack on free speech with their support of attack on immigrants by deporting Palestinians and Lebanese who actually they have their papers. They got everything all right. But they're like, well, no, you're a terrorist. You are now a terrorist. And this is really, it's taken on a much deeper aspect in Europe, but the U.S. is following in their footsteps now. And all these things are extremely dangerous. Like, and again, people are cheering it because they're like, they think they're that maybe that person's a DEI, or it's academia. They're just a liberal, in the same way that people fell for Alex Jones being, thrown one way, and then that just set up everyone else getting screwed. People on the left getting thrown under the bus here sets up again the state preparing to empower itself for an even bigger crackdown. Initially, it's going to be a crackdown on immigrants and on activists and on people who oppose what Israel is doing, who oppose the U.S. war in there and the U.S. support of Israel. But that's only the beginning. It's going to extend to other forms of protest, because for them right now, that is a real threat. What's happening on the campuses, and even though the divestment campaign has not quite gotten the bite that it might want to have, it's a real campaign which presents a real financial threat to the U.S. wanting to do not just some war making, but more war making. And people have to remember that this is not a peace president. This is a war president. He is not taking us farther from World War III. He is extending World War III. He has now gotten more players to agree to war. And he's also starting a new front, and will be starting a new front in the Pacific as soon as they can fucking clear the decks. And that's what they're trying to do in the Middle East. So that's what I want to say is, like, the way people who support Trump see him, they don't support him for his repression. Right. They think of him as a freedom guy.
They associate the repression with being decisive and sticking up for them.
Right, exactly.
And that's And right, it's great. It's always great to talk to you, because I'm not around any Trump people. Not anybody who expresses themselves to me, right?
Yeah, right.
So, like, my colleagues and the people I work with and the students I work with, it's definitely like I'm surrounded by the people on the other side, right?
Yeah, right.
Reacting, and so, in the sense that I think he has a brand associated with repression. The Democrats built that brand. The Democrats helped to build that brand. So he's a perfect, all the bad things that ever happened, we can just project them all onto Trump. And never mind the fact that they've been basically building on each other's policies for, I don't know how long, but at least since I've been politically active, the two parties are on the same team. Where's our team? There's actually no team for us, and we have to start making it.
Correct. And that's the important part, is as long as the capitalists can keep funneling your anger, if you're disgusted with Trump and you just go to the Democrats, or if you're disgusted with Democrats and you go back to the Republicans, they're all good. Keep doing that. But if there's something, or just get disgusted and stay out. But if you
a lot of that too.
Yeah. But if you have convinced yourself that you're out of that game, then I think you're getting somewhere, but we're not there.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point one thing that Brandy had sent me, an article that she found on Twitter. U.S. to use AI to revoke visas of foreign students deemed Hamas supporters. And it says the State Department will deploy artificial intelligence to review student visa holders' social media activity and revoke visas for those perceived as supporting Hamas. The Catch and Revoke initiative will scan tens of thousands of accounts flagging foreign nationals involved in pro-Hamas demonstrations or, quote, anti-Semitic incidents cited in lawsuits. So we're here.
Shoot. I said shoot for many reasons, but one of them is that we actually just had a protest on our campus, and the students were chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And I got some messages from colleagues who were like, that's hate speech. And I don't know how it's developing, but I'm like, oh man. And that repression makes me not want to, it makes me afraid. I feel afraid, and so it works.
Yep.
It's not like it doesn't work.
I think we were sold
Yeah.
by this current administration and Elon Musk with his new Twitter, and we were just sold that there would be no censorship, that we would all have a chance to speak our minds, and that there would be the freedom movement would be honored. And I think that's what we were fighting for in 2020, at least some of us. I considered myself to be, someone who is very much pro freedom of speech, regardless of where you stand, and sorting out our differences, whether publicly or privately, and having those conversations and that dialogue. And a lot of things changed for me in 2020, where I began having conversations with other MAGA folk. And I'm not really against Trump supporters per se. I'm against Trump, Biden, Kamala Harris. I'm against, the politicians at the Capitol. I think it's unfortunate that there isn't a movement, a working class movement, where we can work together. And we've just analyzed the correctional officer strike. And whilst we may not be on the same ideological idea about how we should move about in our stance and what's next for us as workers, but the crackdown on 2,000, I think it was 2,000 workers, and the crackdown on Palestinian protesters, I think there are many similarities, many parallels. And when we start getting distracted by what the president wants us to think about, this is the Hamas terrorist supporters, and we don't think about the freedom of speech that we have, then I say this to my friend Jake, if he listens to this, because we had a heated conversation today, over an hour, and I say this to him, then you don't have a president with principles, and that's false to think that you did to begin with if you're going to vote for him. And you're delusional to think anyone that this is the peace president and the supporter of our right to say what we want. We are now being targeted not by humans, by robots, instructed by humans to seek out who's for or against the government, who's aligning with what the government wants you to think, how you should think, what we should be for. And the dismantling of Doge. Excuse me, I have a runny nose. I don't have COVID, or I don't even have a cold, according to some. And so, the dismantling of government agencies that are going to be replaced by AI, they're going to be replaced by what new inventions the billionaire class is going to invent. We saw them at the inauguration. We even saw how much more investment is being done into AI. We see the competitiveness with China as well as their AI program. And we just seen this so many things unfolding. I imagine us to be at one point then also told to stay indoors and again and to be controlled on what we say and how we should think, and I'm looking up stuff online even as we're talking, and I look at, because I'm thinking, what is unlawful about the USA? What things that are unlawful, and there's nothing that I can find that's unlawful. It's because everything is being censored. We're being catered in a certain way to think of what we have to look for and what we can think.
Yeah.
And
What do you
that's
mean by You were looking for what?
I was looking here because we were having a discussion because we're talking about AI, right? Going after the Palestinian protesters.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, when Jake said to me, my friend said to me, they're supporting Hamas, the terrorists. And I said to him, I think terrorist acts have been committed, not by just Hamas, but rather, the USA. I think, or cartels he was criticizing. And I said to him, I think the greatest cartels are actually the US government. Mm-hmm. And he was baffled by my statement. And I'm sure if now being scanned by AI, I'm sure I'm going to be targeted again for more of this. And I looked up the definition of what makes up a terrorist. And it says here, a person or organization or a group that uses unlawful violence and intimidation. And I looked up what unlawful, of course, I'm not thinking anything lawful. Everything that's going to be lawful, you are allowed to use weapons, and it's always lawful to go against your enemies lawfully. But I was just looking what unlawful means. And I can't find anything. It's always pointing to what unlawful things other countries are doing and other terrorist groups are doing. Anyhow, so I'm just seeing how it's slowly what our information is slowly just being crafted, so we can see what it's designed, what we can only find and see and seek out and search for. Anyhow, back to the Palestinian protesters. Well, there you have it, folks. The president, who a defender of freedom of speech and speaking your mind, is targeting anyone who is doesn't align with his rhetoric.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the definition of terrorist. And I'll say one of the bright spots of the last year or so is the way...
I should give you the actual definition. Sorry. So I'm just looking here. It says here, anyone who uses unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims.
Right. So notice the definition hinges on some concept of law.
Yeah. Wow.
And we just saw...
Let's make laws, make things lawful.
Yeah. We just saw the US and Israel completely reject and shit all over the concept that there should be some sort of international law. You basically had people in the US essentially saying, like, international law isn't for us. And this was under the Biden administration. International law isn't for us. International law is for, like crazy African warlords or something, right? Like, understanding who gets to write the laws. Like, the idea of a lawful violence has now just been made a complete mockery, as we have one of the most open case book definition genocides, where in other genocides you actually had to dig a little to find the people admitting that they wanted to wipe all the people out, right? It was kind of usually implied. And now we have, Israel basically saying, like, yeah, let's kill them all. We're going to kill every single last Israeli. We're going to take this land over, and every last Palestinian. But like you say, the information in the news cycle, I think it's been important that it's been decentralized in the sense that we all get our own little loop, right? We get from, like, social media, we get a very consistent stream of ideas that reinforce each other, because that actually increases dopamine. That makes us more addicted to our phones. Like, in the end, even that social polarization has a lot to do with designing things to optimize profit, right? So we are very much getting, like, both the Matrix, which is actually a very useful analogy, because everybody's soon going to be, we're in our little cocoon, getting, as if we're really making some impact on the world, going, like, as if we're making decisions, we're posting on social media, and we're getting mad about this and mad about that. The actual impact has been to more deepen this sort of individualized experience. You can see that expressed through the fact that in social media, every person becomes potentially their own brand, right? So like each individual person is trying to sell themselves to other people to essentially make profit, which is like one of the most effective ways to remove any sense of collective movement, or like, are we gonna actually talk together and decide and do something in the real world, or do we have this thing that just gives us a dopamine hit whenever we express our anger, or and on the other side, we're also getting the Terminator, because the massive development of technology is being used to physically dominate the world if it can't completely economically dominate it. So that whole dynamic of like how we get our information and the way that we're actually micro targeted. That's what they call them. That's what they call the marketing term. You're micro targeted. They find out exactly the things that make you want to look and click, and then they just give you more of that. And so I want to say something how that plays out politically, though, is that working with, I don't know how much to generalize this, but my recent experience has made me feel like people substitute posting things on the internet when they're angry with actual like group decision making, where there's sometimes like the idea of, oh, united we're, but when it comes down to like, actually, can we communicate and make decisions together, the training that a lot of people have had is my individual feelings should be immediately validated, and that's essentially what it means to be active. So I don't know what's happening within the overall Palestine movement, but I am concerned with the way that the technology has begun to socialize people. And there's very conscious elements who are trying to break away from that, but it's a real effective mechanism for control.
Yeah, and my suspicion, again, I'm not on a campus, but we saw that whole, and it was during Biden's presidency when the attack on Gaza first started. There was a whole slew of campuses that had occupations and were making trouble and were calling for divestment, and they got swept out. And part of it was it got swept out and the year ended, and then people kind of said, well, when we come back on campus, we're coming back. To be honest, I haven't seen that. And it looks to me like that the last round of repression was effective, and now you have an even greater, like, deporting some people, stories like this about the AI, like scanning people's visas.
Yeah.
And like you said yourself, Michael, like, you're now nervous to say a chant that neither of you and I would ever nervous to say. And that means that everyone's hesitant, they've created a situation of hesitancy with regards to expression and action. So it's not a very promising, like, I don't see, like, it looks to me like the BDS movement has been cowed to some extent. I'm not blaming them, but it's just, that's what it looks like from out here.
I'll say that the people who are continuing to organize through it, I hope that there's a layer of them that learn really effective lessons from this period, because there's not going to be, it's not going to be easier.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because if your main motivation is moral, then that's very motivating at first, when a lot of other people are doing it, and you don't necessarily need like a strategic vision for how, okay, in this period, there'll be a layer of people who are going to like really learn some effective lessons they can later apply if they're able to survive this kind of repressive period. But I guess the part about the way that individualism shapes people is that it may be very difficult for them. Maybe very difficult for people who weren't already like previously ideologically won to like the working class actually does have the power to change the world. It'll be hard for them to be convinced of that in this period.
Well,
I don't know.
I guess what I would say is in the same way that when the mandates hit and the Canadian truckers came out and said we're going to do something about, we are taking an action to do something about that. When the Canadian state finally came out and said we're shutting your bank accounts, we're shutting down even the accounts of people who trying to give money to you, and we're shutting some of their accounts, and then we're clearing you off the streets. That definitely took the wind out of the sails of people who thought they were going to do this again. And I think my sense is that people who have been part of campus occupations and they've heard that now maybe it's going to get harder to find jobs because you've been profiled by the
Yeah.
one dude who was talking about, now we've got all your fucking faces. You're not working for me and you're not going to work for somebody else. And even people who found themselves being kicked out of schools because of it. That's like, school is so expensive. School is such a monetary treadmill to try to, get that brass ring, that now you risk a lot, and you risk some real debt and nothing to show for it if you take a stand against genocide. So I do think, I get the sense that people are afraid, rightly afraid, and they don't know what to do in an environment where the state and the private institutions are working together to create this kind of like terror, and it's effective. And Eduardo's right that the kind of howling that they've done on the campus protesters, they were saying for prison guards, who, how dare they go on strike against and their union wouldn't give them that. And then when you saw the governor of New York come out and be like, I'm gonna F you so hard, like, and people are like, okay, here, I gotta take it now, and the other prison guards, and there actually were some people who said, no, that's not right, we're gonna stand up against this. But by and large, workers kind of were like, oh, there, but I'm glad it happened. They're not glad it happened, but it's like, sucks for them, but now I'm back to work.
Right. Yeah, sucks for them. I got to go back to work. I feel like that's a widespread.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I don't blame anybody for it, and I don't know how to solve that riddle other than we'll have to be organized and big enough to make our actions felt, and then to deal with the repercussions when they come and crack down on it. You just have to be that strong. Like, you have to be strong enough to have a next move when they try to do that. If you don't have that next move, then you lose. And that is a question of both politics and organization and size, and
Right.
and we're not in that position.
Yeah, and it doesn't look like anyone else is either, except like, yeah. Well, we talked about a lot of stuff here, Andy. We went
Yes.
all over. I'm like, wait, so what should we? Well, I do think the most accurate model is the U.S. empire is being challenged because there are actual competitive states now. It is no longer it actually does not even have it doesn't have the ability to produce weapons at the same rate. Like, China has now surpassed the US in its production capacity for certain military equipment. And China is also broadening its economic reach. So US supremacy is really being challenged. Like, that's not a fake. That is real. U.S. supremacy is being challenged politically, economically, militarily, and that desperation basically means that all their repressive tools that they are developing, they're going to, prevent dissent at home, but they're not dumb. This idea that, like, oh, Trump's making all these it's like Trump is actually carrying out a very, when you look at how they actually have maneuvered in the past, like, it's very clear that this is not this is complete continuity, that the ceasefire, and let's come back to that, because it really was a chance for them to retool, not just militarily, but also politically.
Yeah.
They gave a pause to make it look like, oh, wow. I mean, for a minute there, Trump, he's he's such an expert, what do you call it? TV, reality TV star, We're like, first he's like saying genocidal stuff, and then he's like saying, like, you gotta stop Israel, and then now he's back to the genocidal stuff. Like, people are really, like, confused and dazzled by all the different stuff he does, but the agenda is very clearly continuity. That and what we understand now is they're trying to basically pivot towards China, set Europe up as a more productive industrial war base to handle Russia, and they're trying to continue to sow division and also expand Israel's power, because that's a great way to sow division in the Middle East, and also to preserve the military power that Israel represents. So those things combined, it's like this is an emerging crisis. I think we could say we're in a crisis, but I think it can get a lot worse.
Yeah, I mean, the way we've talked about it here is we are already in World War III. It's just the early stages of it. And none of these wars, and any ceasefire is going to be a pause to reload. Like,
yeah,
if it's a gunfight with people with 6 shooters, after the 6 shots are fired, that doesn't mean there's peace. That means people are just trying to figure out where their bullets are so they can get it back in their gun so they can fire again. Yeah. That's what ceasefires are. That's certainly what they're going to be. That's what they are under capitalism, but certainly in a war that I believe is only going to grow larger and bring in more forces. That I feel we already started there. There's no ceasefire is not peace. It's right. It's breathing space. It's rearm, relocate, and recover.
What should we call for instead, Andy?
Revolution. That's it. There's no. It's like, that's the thing. Like there is no alternative other than to bring down your own government.
Yeah.
Well, anyhow, I think this is a very lively discussion, and as we look for a way to conclude, because it is closing in on what we were discussing, and I want to just continue saying Suchir Balaji's name, with this 26-year-old who was the OpenAI whistleblower, because he was deemed to have died of a suicide. And because you mentioned AI now targeting, it's like these are the things that AI was built for. There are so many dark secrets that I think the government holds, that under the guise of this will help us be a better society, help us with our homework, be a support, I'm not sure, whatever guise that there is, it's only a way to, like a Trojan horse, to get us into condition to think that these tools are necessary for our survival, and then they're used against us. And I appreciate, Michael, for you having brought up the topic, and I look forward to part 2 of our conversation with some heavy reading.
Yeah. Let's dig into some the theoretical roots of problematic aspects of the left.
Yeah, and to talk about the Hamas and resistance. I think that's going to be demonized right now, and I think it's really important that we just talk about what's really there.
Yeah. I also want to say that this discussion and events recently have made it clear to me that politically, we actually really need to be free speech absolutists.
Yes.
And also, that's not compatible with social media because there's an algorithm
Hmm.
that decides who gets to see what you even put out there.
Yep.
We've been censored many times.
Yeah, and they can also take whatever they're a stronger enemy, right? Like, this is the thing that the sort of personalization of politics has been so frustrating about. Like, we are not gonna win by making every single small battle into like a personal affront that must that you must win all these little battles, right? And also like announcing your anger to the world. It's not neutral terrain. There's no possibility for social media to become neutral terrain, because as it develops and it learns more from us using it, its main role is to keep extracting from us.
Yep.
And to control us. So,
and I
there's
think
the free speech.
The important point you make is, even if there was no censorship on this in this thing, it would still be anti-free speech, because it, like you said, it's weighting things and it's making decisions about what you see and what you don't see. So that's not free speech. So, like, first of all, it's got tons of censorship, but you take that piece away, and the way this whole thing operates is not free.
Don't give yourself up to the Matrix, man.
Yeah. But I think I agree with you. If people, there have been discussions. Do you think it's going to go Matrix? Or do you think it's going to go Terminator? It's like, looks like it's going to go both.
Both. But maybe they'll just have the machines fight each other, and we'll all be in our cozy little pots,
Yeah. Right.
Anyway.
Good hope.
All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenge the mainstream left. Post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog on Whatsleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast and channel there on our website, and connect with us. I remind folks, if you fancy anything you've heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, BitChute, Odyssey, YouTube, Rumble, or Telegram. You can find our blog, again, and any of those links in the episode notes, wherever you found this episode. If you'd like to give us feedback about something you've heard, or suggest something for us to cover, such as Michael Hoffman has suggested something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. And Michael Hoffman, if I'm not here and you are in my absence, please read everything as I say it in the outro and intro, and do not do as Andy does. I'm with co-host Andy Lipson, and thank you for joining us, Michael Hoffman. We hope to have a part 2 conversation with you again. Thank you all for listening. Ciao.
Ciao.